Hello and welcome to this Astranti pre-scene analysis video series for the May and August 2020 strategic case study exam on hoverboard pay-as-you-go company Runnabout. And before we begin, just going to cover the contents and which videos are going to cover which specific parts of the pre-scene before giving you an introduction into the video analysis series itself, or how we're going to do it and what I hope you will achieve by watching this series. So in the first video, we're going to look at the introduction to the pre-scene and the kinds of things that we are going to be looking out for as we continue through this video series. Then in the second video, we're going to look at the micro-mobility industry. This is the name that is given for all the kinds of industries that are similar to Runabout with its pay-as-you-go hoverboards, so pay-as-you-go bicycles, anything that's to do with very short trips within a city centre. This is distinguished from perhaps more public transport industry, buses and trains, etc. Then in the third video, we'll look at an introduction to the company, the history of the company, what the organisation is all about. Then in the fourth video, we'll look more at the extract from the annual report. So we'll be looking at the vision statement, the mission statement, the values of the organisation, what its purpose is, what its strategy is, etc. And also the board of directors and the organizational chart, so how the organization is run, how it is structured. In the fifth video, we'll then look at the different stories that have been given in the pre-scene, various news articles and the extracts from the hoverboard users blog. And there's not always a lot of information, a lot of things to analyze in those sections, but actually that is one of the most important sections in the pre-scene, because the news stories give you an insight into the kinds of issues that in this fictional creation of CIMA's, the actual kinds of issues that the company is facing, the kinds of things that they are likely to face in the future. So it gives you a real insight into where the examiner is heading, the kinds of questions that they are going to ask in the exam. So it's a really important section, that bit. And then in the sixth video, we'll look at the risks of the organization. Risks very, very important to the strategic case study level. And so we'll look at the risk report that's provided in the pre-scene. We'll also be able to add in the different risks that we've perhaps analyzed and brought up throughout the previous videos. So we'll do an overall summary of the risks in that video there. And then we'll finish by looking at the financial statements. So we'll be looking at the statements of Runnabout. We're also looking at the statements of the competitors, doing some analysis over that, looking at their working capital cycles, and looking at their statement of financial position, how much they're investing, what kinds of dividends they're paying, etc. And also look at the share price of the company to see if we can read into anything about whether it's increasing, whether it's decreasing, whether it's volatile or not compared to the market. So that is a structure of this video analysis series. And those first 7 videos will focus on the pre-scene document itself. There are 3 more videos in this series that we'll look at afterwards. So we'll have the strategic analysis video, which looks at the various key models from the CIMA syllabus and applies them to the case. And we'll also have the top 10 most likely issues, which are based on our experience of teaching this case study over many years, and also the issues that arise within the pre-scene. And so that's a very useful video for giving you an insight into the kinds of questions that are likely to come up in the strategic case study exam. And the final video of the series looks at the industry and goes through our industry pack and looks at the various key points from that. And it's very useful to look at that because it's really important that you are aware of the industry, you have some knowledge of the industry, and that you can use industry points in your answers, because the CIMA examiner has specifically stated in the examiner reports that are produced after the case studies have been sat that students are not using enough industry examples. So we've created that so that we've done the work for you so that you have some industry examples, you have that knowledge, that information that you can use and apply in your exam. So before we begin the analysis, I'll just tell you a bit about who I am and also how we are going to go through this video series. So first of all, my name is Peter Steth. I am the head of strategic case study here at Astranti. I've been teaching the strategic case study since 2016. And prior to that, I taught the management and operational case study. I'm also heavily involved in writing the various mock exams that we produce for our course, and also marking those mocks as well, seeing where students are going right, seeing where they are going wrong. And I use that information to help feedback into my video analysis as well, common mistakes that students make. I've also written several of the free study texts that you can use here at Astranti. So onto the video series itself. Essentially, we're going to go through the pre-scene section by section, picking out the various key points, various things that are going to be important for your exam. Also look at how real world companies, or how companies in this actual industry, obviously it's a fictional company in a fictional industry, fictional country, etc. But there are plenty of parallels with the real world, and that's what we will be tying the analysis to. So look at various key business models as well, some of the things that you will have learnt during your objective test studies, how we can apply some of those models to the case. So SWOT analysis, stakeholder matrices, and so on. We'll also look at likely exam issues that could arise, as in when we're looking through the analysis, are there particular points that they keep referring to? Is that a hint on where the examiner is thinking they may take the exam? What previous questions have come up in previous exams when this kind of information has been given, and so on. And also just key exam hints and tips as well, things to prepare you for the day, ways in which you can perhaps streamline your information, streamline the information within the pre-scene so that it helps you for the exam. Then look at the strategic analysis, our strategic analysis video, which looks at all the different models, lots of the big models, and applies them directly to the pre-scene. So we'll be looking at where the company is, where the company wants to be, and how it's going to get there using various different theories. And we'll conclude the video series by looking at the top 10 most likely issues. These will be based on previous issues that have come up in previous case studies. It will also be based on how much weight is given to particular topics, to particular things within the pre-scene. And how this actual series will work is when we're going through it section by section, I'm going to assume that we have no prior knowledge as we go through it, as in the whole point of this video series should be as if you and I were looking through the videos together, or looking through the pre-scene together. So I'm not going to act as if I've read through the entire pre-scene when I'm going through each individual page. We're going to look at it as if we're seeing everything for the first time. So we're not going to be ruling anything out at any particular stage because of what may come later in the pre-scene or what may come later in information given to us by CIMA. We're just going to assume that every single thing is relevant. We're going to assume that every single sentence is the first time that you or I have seen it, and we're analyzing it based on its own individual, mutually exclusive merits. What I suggest is that you read through a particular section and make notes, and then come back to the start of the video and we'll go through it together. And as already mentioned, at the end of the pre-scene, analysis, we will then move on to the strategic analysis and top 10 most likely issues, which in a sense summarize everything that we will have done throughout the pre-scene. And as you're making notes on the pre-scene, remember this is the context for which the exam will be based. So there will be a lot of information here that perhaps won't necessarily be relevant in terms of answering the question. They're not going to be testing us on our knowledge of the pre-scene. They're not going to be testing us on things specifically in the pre-scene. It is the background information that will give us context when we are answering our questions in the exam. So if they are asking us a question on whether they should go ahead with this particular project and give us some information on that project, we will have background information on the industry, background information on the company that will allow us to pinpoint the suitability of this project based on what we know about the organization. Remember that you shouldn't be pre-writing anything based on the pre-scene. So don't assume that they're going to ask us a question on this. I'm going to write out a mock answer based entirely on this information in the pre-scene, and I'm going to ignore anything that comes up in the unseen, because remember, the unseen is the actual exam. The material given to us in the unseen should take precedence over material in the pre-scene if it contradicts. So don't write anything based on the pre-scene or pre-write anything based on the pre-scene, because it is the background information for us to deal with it. It's not the unseen, it's not the exam, it's just the background information. But saying that, we must use the information in the exam, but we must tie it back to the context of the unseen. And your recommendations must be consistent with strategic analysis. So if when we're going through our strategic analysis and we're looking at suitable projects, we're looking at suitable things for the company to undertake, if your recommendation completely flies in the face of all that analysis, it flies in the face of everything that's in the pre-scene, everything's in the unseen, then you're likely to get marked down because it is not a sensible conclusion. So let's begin by looking at the first page, the introduction to the pre-scene, the introduction to the case. And it's a very short section, and it's the kind of thing that students often skip over. They look at this and think, oh, it's just literally introducing me to what I'm actually going to be doing here. It's not important. I'll skip on. I'll skip ahead to the risk reports. I'll skip ahead to the financial statements. I'll skip ahead to the news articles, the stuff that I really want to look at and the stuff that I think is going to be really useful and really important to study. And I totally empathize with that, but there's actually a wealth of really important information in this initial introduction that will shape the way you analyze the rest of the pre-scene. So it's actually really important that you read this section. As I mentioned, the pre-scene is the context of the exam, and the introduction is the context of the pre-scene itself. So you must be familiar with this before you move on. And what we can see in the very first paragraph here is it completely sets the scene for the role in which we are going to be playing within the exam. And the role that you play is very important. CIMA expect you to fulfill that role. They expect you to answer the questions in the exam from the perspective of a senior manager working in the finance function at Runnabout. And this is incredibly important because you are not to answer the questions like a student. You are supposed to answer the questions like a senior manager. And let's think about what that means, the role that CIMA has given as a senior manager. They have said that they expect you to be able to analyze things from a strategic perspective. They expect you to consider risks. They expect you to be able to source finance and to source funding and to make appropriate recommendations. And this is not me telling you this. This is what CIMA themselves have said they expect from students sitting the strategic case study exam. So what I don't want to see when I look at some of the mock scripts that you submit is you not considering the strategy. You're not considering the risks of things that you are suggesting, because that is a key P3 topic. You're not considering where funding is going to come from, where financing is going to come from. And I don't want to see really wish-washy recommendations as well. You say, oh, well, I suppose it could be all right if we do this. And perhaps, yeah, might be this other option might be good as well, but, you know, do what you want. No, you have to make very firm recommendations with justifications, and also make some comments on how you expect the board to take that forward. Advise the board on how to take your recommendation forward. Remember, you are reporting directly to the board. You are advising them on projects and strategic matters. Think about the organizations that you work for. Think about the board of directors at the company you work for, or perhaps you are on the board of directors. But either way, think about how you would talk to them. Would you come into their boardroom and have a huge mass of information under your arms of just raw data, etc., and chuck it all on the conference room table and say, there's all the information, make something of that and walk out? No, they expect you to come in with a suggestion of what to do going forward. Your take on the information, what you think this means for the company, and what the company should do going forward. So remember, it's really important that you act like a senior manager and not like a CIMA student. And this is all part of writing effectively in the exam as well. The main reason students fail the strategic case study exam is not because of knowledge of the pre-scene, is not because of knowledge of the theory. They know the theory. They've passed their E3, P3, F3. They know the pre-scene. They've read through the pre-scene several times, or they've watched this video series on the pre-scene. The main reason students fail is because of exam technique. And part of exam technique is planning effectively and writing effectively, so that you are actually answering the questions in a style, in a fashion that you need to in order to comply with the requirements of your role. So actually, it's not just a case of you put yourself in this mindset of a senior manager. It's actually really fundamental to actually passing this exam, because you need to be writing in a very direct, very informative style, giving solutions, offering solutions, not just beating around the bush, talking about various different theories and what this may mean for the organization. You need to be very direct, very to the point, and avoid waffling on. And also what we can see here is that we work in the finance function. So we are not working within the organization in the same way as someone in the production department or someone in the marketing department, etc. We are in the finance function, looking after everything finance related across the organization. And being part of the finance function is a really important part of the CIMA syllabus. And particularly since the syllabus changed, the amount of information relating to the finance function and the importance of the finance function has been ramped up. And nowadays, part of being in the finance function is not about just worrying about finance. CIMA defines it as being a strategic partner to the organization. So this means that we're not just focusing on the numbers. We need to be aware of the industry, we need to be aware of what the organization is about, where the organization is heading, and assist where we can in helping the company. So again, it's very important that you consider that. You are not just an accountant, you are a senior manager in the finance function, operating as a strategic partner to the organization as a whole. And all this information here is really, really important in ultimately establishing a mindset that you need to have for this case study exam. So that's the first thing that you need to do, is you need to put yourself in this position. Make sure you are considering all these things that I have listed here, because if you don't do that, it doesn't matter how many times you read the pre-scene, doesn't matter how well you know the theory, doesn't even matter how many times you practice planning, answering your questions in the exam, because if you are not doing it from the right standpoint, you are not going to be answering the questions effectively in this exam. So let's move on to a bit about the organization now. Runnabout is a quoted company that operates a pay-as-you-go hoverboard vehicle service for vehicles for use by the public in major cities. So you've probably seen hoverboards around about, people standing on things and leaning and they move around, etc. And it's a very quick and efficient way of perhaps traveling short distances in congested city centres. But there's a few bits to talk about here. So a few things that we don't know yet. We may find out later on in the pre-scene, but as I mentioned, we are going through this pre-scene like it's the first time. So operate pay-as-you-go hoverboards. So this will work in a very similar way perhaps to Uber, where you have an app and you can book your hoverboard out and you go collect it from a docking station, the same way as various different bicycle companies as well operate. But we don't know whether we produce these hoverboards yet or whether we purchase them from suppliers. And there are quite a few big hoverboard companies that have sprung up over the last few years. And it's important that you are aware of some real-life companies because you can reference them in the exam and also may help your industry research. And a quick look would reveal that some of the biggest companies, a lot of them are based in China. And those companies are companies like Swagtron, Airwheel, Razor Hovertrax, Islehawk, and Mega Wheels. So there are a few companies to get you started in terms of ones that you can look at for reference. And a lot of these companies in China have all joined an alliance called the Hoverboard Industry Alliance. And this features hoverboard producers, hoverboard retailers, and companies similar to Runnabout who are operating these pay-as-you-go systems. And it's really important that you consider these alliances, and if there is one in this fictional world that CIMA has created, it's important that Runnabout perhaps joins it if it's not already part of it, because that allows it to be a driving force or to aid other companies in being a driving force in hoverboard legislations. If you're part of an alliance, then you're more aware of what's going on, you're keeping up to date, you're being part of a group that is perhaps lobbying against governments to allow certain restrictions to be lifted, so you can have your hoverboards in different places, etc. So it's really important from a strategic perspective to be part of these alliances. And also that alliance in itself becomes a key stakeholder of the organization because they're going to be have a lot of power over what companies can do. And this is perhaps particularly important for a growing industry like the hoverboard market. Their latest estimates suggest that it's going to be a cumulative annual growth rate of over 4% for the next decade. So that is an opportunity for the organization. Of course, it's a growing market and growing at quite a good rate. And it's also important that we need to consider the various different councils of the major cities, as we need to require permission from them in order to operate. So they're another important stakeholder. And the organization operates out of a country called Zealand. And Zealand is a large and prosperous country with a population of more than 1 billion people. So for a real world comparison, we're looking more at a country like China or India. And like China and India, the major cities have grown rapidly, and many people within them are struggling with things such as traffic congestion and pollution, sort of pollution in some of the major cities in China and India. And so using something like a hoverboard just to get around small distances in a city centre might be an efficient way of getting around. And also from an environmental perspective, it would help reduce pollution because these will run off of electricity rather than diesel and petrol like cars will. So when we're thinking to our various different CIMA models, such as pastel analysis, we're thinking about the impact on the environment and things that from an environmental perspective could have an impact on the business. And as rules over pollution increase, that may only benefit an organization like this because, of course, more people will have to be switching from driving cars to using hoverboards and other sorts of micro-mobility products. and also ties in with social as well. As the public become more and more aware of the impact of pollution, a lot of younger people are very conscious of it, and a lot of younger people are also using these sorts of products. So there's a lot of opportunity in the future to really grow and expand on this market. And because it's a prosperous country as well, there's perhaps going to be people available to purchase these sorts of vehicles or to rent these sorts of vehicles in the pay-as-you-go formats that we provide here at Runnabout. And Runnabout is based in Zealand, and the currency in Zealand is the G dollar. And when you're thinking about finances, then you need to be aware of currencies, you need to be aware of those various different methods in which you can protect yourself and mitigate the risk of things happening with the currency. So again, going back to Pestel analysis, you need to think about the economy, if the value of the G dollar is affected, if any kind of situation occurs in Zealand where currency is devalued or there's a recession, etc., then that's going to have an impact on the business. And also, at the moment, we are not aware of whether Runnabout operates in different countries, but if it becomes apparent or if there is a question in the exam which looks at the possibilities of expanding and moving into different countries, we also have to think about exchange rates and exchange risk as well. If the value of the G dollar is not particularly high, then it may not be as profitable to expand it into different countries. And remember what I said earlier about considering risks. If you were to answer a question like this in the exam, you would need to think about how you can mitigate currency and economic risks. So thinking about those various different ways in which you can mitigate against transaction and translation risks. So thinking about your leading, your lagging, your futures contracts, these sorts of things that you studied in F3, and consider those risks from a strategic standpoint. But what I mean by that as well is please do not spend all your time revising futures contracts and options contracts and testing yourself on those and the calculations, etc., because the actual knowledge side of that has already been tested. You were tested on that in F3. You've already been tested on the calculations, on your ability to answer those sorts of questions. And there are no calculations in the strategic case study exam. You just need to be aware of it from a strategic perspective. And that is ultimately to shield the organization from losing out due to currency risks, and how that will allow you to then maintain your revenue and provide returns to shareholders. Very holistic, very from an overarching perspective rather than the actual bits involved in it, the specific theory involved in it. And also the company prepares its financial statements in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standards. And this also ties back to talking about currency and economic risk, in that if they do decide to operate overseas, etc., they're already preparing their statements in a way that conforms with the International Financial Reporting Standards, which makes it easier for the organization to then expand because it won't have to change the way in which it conducts its financial reporting. And the company is operating in Zealand, which has an active and well-regulated stock exchange. And this is beneficial in that because it is a quoted company, there is opportunity there to raise financing through equity financing on the stock market. And also from an employment perspective, there is a certain degree of prestige and perhaps sustainability and security about working for a large publicly traded organization that you perhaps don't get at a very small company. And that will also help with recruitment. So it will help with resourcing staff. And as part of being a quoted company in Zealand, the company is expected to adhere to the Zealand Code of Corporate Governance. Now, of course, we don't know what the Zealand Code of Corporate Governance is because Zealand is a fictional country. But whenever CIMA has mentioned a code of corporate governance and then puts the name of the fictional country before it, The code is based around the UK Code of Governance, which of course is an important part of the CIMA syllabus. So when you see GLAN Code of Corporate Governance, think about the UK Code of Corporate Governance, the components of the UK Code of Corporate Governance, and think about that within the context of Runnabout and GLAN. And it's very important that organizations do adhere to these codes, and CIMA always wants you to adhere to them as well. So if when we're going through, we see things that, well, that's not really correlating with what the code suggests, then what we as a senior manager in the finance function should be suggesting is ways in which they could improve their governance, because ultimately adhering to the code of governance is all about running the organization in the best interest of all stakeholders, which is ultimately, as a CIMA qualified accountant, is part of your role, is to ensure that stakeholders are cared for. A good senior manager will consider all stakeholders. So make sure you do that in your exam. So let's summarize what we know so far. So we know that as part of our role as a senior manager in the finance function at Runnabout, we need to be considering the strategy, considering all stakeholders, risks, funding, and making recommendations. We know that there are some strengths to the organization, particularly with regards to funding, equity funding, by being a quoted organization. We know that there's a great opportunity here for growth given the size of the market and the rate at which the market is growing. We also have some information about key stakeholders to the company. So the board is going to be a stakeholder, staff are going to be stakeholders, customers are going to be stakeholders, members of the public are going to be stakeholders, and make sure that no one's injured walking around on the streets by one of our customers gliding around on a hoverboard. The councils of the local towns and cities are going to be stakeholders, as is the Alliance of the hoverboard industry, if such one exists in this fictional world in the same way as it does in the real world. And also the buyers as well, if we're purchasing our hoverboards. And we've got these various different companies here. There's going to be actual companies in this fictional industry as well that are going to be important to Runnabout. Also consider various different external environment factors. We've considered economics as well, thinking about Pestel analysis, the state of the country. Are the people going to have the money to be able to use these services? The social aspect of it, is that driving demand for it because people are more conscious about the environment itself, obviously important. Laws are going to be important as well. Any law passed that limits hoverboards, limits the speed, requires people to wear helmets, etc., could have an impact on it. And also just to think about technology. Hoverboards are generally very new and they're going to develop, they're going to get better. And also there is advancements in battery power and things like that that are going to have an impact. At the moment, what's known as the supercapacitor is in production, or is in the research stage. Supercapacitor, it sounds like something out of Back to the Future or something, but actually it's the next stage in battery development. So originally you had your traditional batteries, and then you had lithium-ion batteries that powering your phone, etc. And then supercapacitor is the step above that. So that's going to be much more efficient from a charging perspective. It's going to be much more efficient from a running perspective as well. It will generate a lot more power and last a lot longer. So there's lots of different environmental factors and external factors that are going to have an impact on perhaps where this business goes in the future. So as you can see, I've summarized our already growing Pestel analysis that we'll be able to create simply by looking at the opening page. And also different models that we are going to build upon as we progress through this preceding include doing a SWOT analysis, looking for more threats to the company, opportunities to the company, and also looking at perhaps where the weaknesses are in this organization. We'll also be looking at the competitiveness of the industry, as it's very much a growing industry at the moment, so there's likely to be a lot of competitors all trying to carve out their own piece in the market. We'll look at the various different critical success factors for this organization, and then also the key performance indicators that they in turn will need to measure in order to identify whether they are being successful or not. So we'll be building in a performance measurement aspect to it as well. And also we're looking at various different strategy models such as Ansof's and Porter's growth, etc., just to look at what kinds of opportunities there could be for the organization in the future. So please join me for the next videos as we start to really build on those models and start adding in lots of bits of information from the CIMA syllabus, and also looking at it from a holistic perspective of the senior management working in the finance function here at Runnabout, so that we can add a lot more context to our role so that we really feel ready to play that role when we sit our exam. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to finish by just telling you a few things about the products that we produce here at Astranti and the ones that are part of our course. So these materials can all be purchased as part of the course or purchased individually. So we have our study text. We have 3 study texts for all the objective test exams. So 3 study texts for E1, P1, F2, F3, etc. But we also have the study text specifically for the case study exams, split into 2 parts. The first is about how to approach the exam, how to analyze the information, how to plan your answers, how to write your answers, and also the second part, which looks at the key theories from the objective test levels that are relevant to the particular case study. So if you are looking at P2, F2, E2 for the management exam, F3, P3, E3 for the strategic case study exam, and so on. We have our course videos, which look at how to plan your answers, how to manage your time effectively. These are the key reasons why people fail the exam. We have our pre-scene analysis, which looks at the pre-scene in a lot of depth, applies key information to that, and also concludes with the strategic analysis, where we look at the various different models in the CIMA syllabus and apply them to the case, and also the top 10 most likely issues to arise in your exam. Generally, we have a 70 to 80% accuracy rate on our top 10 issues. Our industry pack, which details in great depth the history and the current contemporary issues within the particular industry that the pre-scene is based on. We also have 20 to 25 industry examples that you can use within your answers. We have mock exams that can be purchased with or without marking and feedback, where you can get some real exam practice in, look for the kinds of things that the examiner is going to bring up in the exam, and also get marking and feedback from expert markers who have marked for CIMA and for us for many years, who know exactly the kind of things that the examiner is looking for, exactly the kinds of mistakes that students often make, and can provide lots of detailed feedback to ensure that you improve on your performance. We also have our master classes, which are 2 day-long classes which look at all the key issues facing students in the exam. We will also go through live planning, showing you how to plan your answers effectively, how to write your answers effectively. Again, key things that cause people to fail the strategic case study exam, or any of the case study exams for that matter. And also, if you do sign up for our course, provided that you have filled out your forms, provided that you have submitted your mocks, provided you have done everything to show that you have really given it your all to try and pass this exam, we also offer a pass guarantee, giving a free resit to anyone who fails the exam.